time. We're going to wait about 30 seconds to make sure everyone gets in, and then I'll proceed with the introductions. Ten more seconds, and then here we go. It's great to see everyone, sort of. My name is Juliette Kayyem. I am the faculty chair of the Homeland Security program here at the Kennedy School of Government, where I work and have worked with the chief, so to speak, in the past and for many years before then. So I am absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you and the center for a really significant event about an important book that made the New York Times bestseller list, which is so exciting. So thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening. Again, my name is Juliette Kayyem, and I am here to talk about a new and fantastic book. I want to first, however, start with a few announcements on the Ash Center's behalf. So I want to thank them for having me. The Ash Center would like to acknowledge the land on which Harvard sits as the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people and a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. Today's event is being recorded, and the video will be made publicly available on the Ash Center's YouTube channel. You are welcome to submit questions anytime throughout the duration of the event. I am monitoring that Q&A. Please do not raise your hand. I obviously can't see you and they have no chat capacity. So better to raise to put something into the Q&A, and I'm going to try to get through as many questions as possible. But let's start with the programming. We're very lucky to be joined by Chief Pfeiffer, who's a senior fellow with the program on crisis leadership at Harvard Kennedy School. The chief, or Joe, or call him what you will, but I'm going to call him the chief today, was the chief of counterterrorism and emergency preparedness for the New York Fire Department before retiring in July 2018, and was the first chief on scene at the World Trade Center attack on the morning of September 11th, 2001. In lieu of saying more about the chief and his role on the 9/11 attacks, we're actually going to play a 3-minute interview now that will help introduce him to our virtual audience today. This interview, as many of you are familiar, there's been lots of documentaries and interviews, and this is a very powerful one about the day of. And then I'm going to do some questions and answers and then open it up to you. Thank you.
Joseph Pfeiffer didn't just answer the call that day.
901 to Manhattan.
He also made the call.
We just had a plane crash into Level 4 of the World Trade Center.
While on another routine run in lower Manhattan, Pfeiffer literally heard the sound of disaster coming.
Heard this loud noise of a plane coming overhead, and then I watched this plane flying at a low altitude race past us.
The moment captured by a film crew that had been following Pfeiffer that day, later featured in a documentary.
Plane's going this way.
Going along the Hudson River at a very, very fast speed, and so low I could read on the fuselage the word American. And then I saw the plane aim and crash into the World Trade Center.
Pfeiffer, an FDNY battalion chief at the time, was likely closest and initially in charge.
It looked like the plane was aiming towards the building, transmitter third along.
I remember having to slow my thinking down a little bit and create a deliberate calm.
You immediately sent your firefighters into the North Tower. Did you know what you were sending them into?
I knew that we had multiple floors on fire, and I knew that thousands of people were trapped.
He made critical decisions, ordering the South Tower evacuated before it was hit, likely saving countless lives. Among the firefighters who raced into the North Tower was his younger brother and fellow firefighter, Kevin.
My brother, as he came in, we were able to look at each other and wondered if we were both going to be okay.
And later, as the conditions grew worse, Chief Pfeiffer issued this ominous order.
And I got on the radio and said, "Command to all units in Tower 1, evacuate the building."
You were asking firefighters to leave a burning building. full knowledge that there were people that you couldn't reach?
Perhaps the first time in history that a fire chief ordered the evacuation of our firefighters with 1,000 people in the building.
In his book, Ordinary Heroes, Pfeiffer doesn't describe supermen rushing into the burning tower, but in fact, ordinary mortal men.
I look at my hero firefighters, and I think they would say the same thing, that we did ordinary things, but in an extraordinary time in history.
Including his brother.
Kevin Pfeiffer.
It's my brother. With his engine company, we lost the entire engine company that day.
As we walk along here, you see all these names. These are the people we lost that day. How much do you think about the people that you and your firefighters saved that day?
That day, we saved 20,000 people. And I think that's what we have to remember.
Wow. I've seen that several times now, and I want to thank you for being here and for sharing your story, and of course your brother's story. I want to begin with something that may seem rather obvious, but it's sometimes helpful because you're not only a chief, you are also an author. And I wanted to ask sort of what animated you for this book, this telling now? Sort of just thinking about this is the book, right? You're that moment.
Juliette, is good to see you again. We usually see each other teaching at the Kennedy School,
I know.
But Zoom is the way. But why now is a great question, and I think a couple things. One is that for 90% of the last 20 years, I was pretty busy.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to write. But since I retired in July of 2018, I thought this was a good time to reflect on what took place, what we learned, the courage of that day, and to put it in writing. Now, you'll love this. When I first approached the publishers, I wanted to write an academic book on crisis leadership. And they said, no, that's your second book. You need to tell your story. And that's how I began writing what it was like for me that day, what it felt like, and what I was thinking.
Yeah. So let's turn to that. Everyone knows a Tuesday morning, you're on shift and anticipating, as everyone was a normal day. So tell the audience sort of your now 20 years later, but your memory of that day. And this is an opportunity also about the stories of the book. I should tell readers that, the book is, as was described in Lester Holt segment, is not a glorification. It's not a, great man theory of firefighters. It is actually quite personable and something that I think all of us can learn from each story and each reaction.
That day, and I want to just show a couple pictures.
Yes, please, that'd be great. So we'll do that.
But that day started off like a normal day. Yeah. We got a call to a gas leak in the street, something very routine. And as we were standing in the street, we heard this loud noise of a plane coming overhead. And I saw this plane race past us down the Hudson River, and then it aimed and crashed into the World Trade Center. And I knew in that very moment that this was no accident, that this was a deliberate attack. And as we raced to the Trade Center in lights and sirens, as the firefighters, the police officers, the EMTs and paramedics, I could tell you that even though this is our job, this is what we do, I can tell you that every first responder that day looked at the burning buildings and made a personal decision to go in. And we knew that this was the most dangerous job of our lives. And I take people inside the North Tower, and I explain what it was like standing there and ordering people to go up. And what it was like. Firefighters aren't exactly quiet people.
Yeah.
They make a lot of noise and they
Yeah.
chat a lot. But that morning they came in quietly. And they had a grim look on their face because they knew how dangerous this was.
Yeah.
And they knew that thousands of people were in their greatest moment of need.
Yeah. When you say, because I certainly am, I come from the counter, or was sort of firmly in counterterrorism then. When you say you knew at that moment, that put you ahead of many people, including the White House at the time, which had told the president that they thought it was a smaller plane, that it was an accident, until the second one. What kind of training, intelligence insights did you have that you knew, that you were that this was the moment? And it was, it took others a while to get their sort of head around it.
I think what made me different, and the units I was with, standing in the street, is that we saw it.
Yeah.
And I saw the plane flying so low that I could read the fuselage, the American on the side of it. And I literally saw the plane aim into the building. If this was an accident, it would have landed in the Hudson River, or New York Harbor. But this plane, and I said it in the car. So, see, the interesting thing about my life is everything's recorded because I had Jules Naudet with me.
Right.
And in the car responding, my exact words was, this was a direct attack. So I knew this was no accident.
And so knowing it wasn't an accident, one would anticipate further things, but because it was terrorism, and for those who are not old enough won't remember, Chief, you probably have the same feeling as me now, that as our students get further distance, you sort of have to remind them of sort of what those moments were like. So now we hit 20 years and the 20-year anniversary this September. And there was, I guess I'd call it a nostalgia for that. And I wonder if you, for a horrible time, I don't know how to describe it better, but it was like a nostalgia for the horror. And I wondered if you felt the same way, and your experience of sort of the 20 years, and what do you think that was about?
I think the 20th year was very different than the previous anniversaries, including the 10th year, which was covered by news media a lot.
Right.
I think the 20th year, people wanted to get that feeling of unity, that we were in this together.
Yeah.
And certainly we saw that with the first responders running in. But after the collapse, in the days and the weeks and the months after, we felt this national unity. And I would argue that it was beyond that. There was a sense of global unity.
Mm-hmm.
So many people were coming to New York to say, how can I help? And I think that feeling that we were in this together was something that we want now, because we're so fragmented, we're so divided, we're at each other's throats. And I think we need to grasp that sense of unity, because if we're ever going to get past this moment in time that we're in now of diversity, of fragmentation, and not believing in each other, we have to go back to 20 years ago, what it felt like, and capture it and apply it today.
Yeah, I mean, when you look back, I think that's right. I mean, I think we all of us who've been in the space before sort of were called upon to reflect on it, you were not, one was not nostalgic for 9/11, but that sense of what had been lost in that 20 years. And when you look back to that day, because a huge chunk, I'm going to hold it up, a huge chunk of the book, and I'm just finding my dog ears and in a good way, is just here you are in a position in which you are directing, you see something, you know what it is, and you are now sort of, you collect yourself and then start to direct and then call back, right? As you realize what's about to happen. And I mean this in the sense of, we all can learn from reflection. You looking back, what's your sort of biggest lesson learned? Sort of, I wish I had known that, or I wish I had done it differently, or this is the way we have to think about this now.
After reflecting on it and literally talking to everybody, let me explain what happened at a critical moment, and let me just throw up a picture.
Yeah.
That we have a
Can
sense.
Everyone see that? Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Wait, Joe, I don't see anything.
Hold on, I'm going to get to it right now. This is at 9:59 that morning.
Yeah.
When the South Tower collapsed. This was the moment that, if you were watching on TV, you had more situational awareness than I did. What happened was, I heard this loud rumbling sound, and I had to make a decision literally in 1 or 2 seconds. And then the entire lobby goes black, that I can't even see the hand in front of my face. And what I did at that moment was, I took about 60 seconds to just deliberately think. The chiefs I was with, my bosses, saying, we got to get out of here. And they were right. They were using that intuitive part of the brain. And we can't command in darkness. We can't even see each other. Yeah. But I knew how to get out of this building. I was in the building well over 100 times. So that gave me the ability just to think. And I knew if we had to get out of there, I had to pull my firefighters out. And that's where I made the announcement, command to all units in Tower 1, evacuate the building. But if you were watching on TV, you knew what happened. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I thought we were the only ones in trouble. So to answer your question, and I think it's important that we know this, that at the same time I was scrambling to get out, there was police helicopters circling the building that said that the South Tower just collapsed, and that in the North Tower, the top 15 floors are glowing red. That the corner of the building is starting to buckle. Pull everybody back. It won't take that much longer. And those are direct quotes.
Yeah.
And that message never got to the fire department. And the fire department never asked.
Yeah.
Now, you got to be wondering, how do these two great organizations, NYPD and FDNY, not talk to each other at the most critical time? And most commission reports and most other reports will just say we didn't talk. But in the book, I wanted people to wrestle with the idea, why?
Yeah.
And what happens during a crisis, our stress response, the stuff happening within our bodies or within our minds. There's this wonderful neurological cocktail, of adrenaline, that fight or flight, and cortisol and dopamine, trying to match things to the past. But there's another neurological hormone we don't talk about, and that's oxytocin, another stress hormone. And what that does is that we turn into our own groups.
Yeah.
So it was natural for police to turn into police and fire to turn into fire. As a matter of fact, we see this, just think of your own family, parents protecting their kids.
Yeah.
This is a natural stress response. And I think the most important thing that I learned over 20 years is that this will happen again, unless we create conditions that we're going to literally stand next to each other. And that's what we've done in New York. We put it into protocol that I have to stand next to my counterpart with an arm's distance, literally with an arm's distance. And that we share not only voice, we talk about interoperability, but also about video and data. I want everything, and I want it on my phone.
Yeah.
And quick and in real time. So I think those are the lessons that not only did we take from 20 years ago, but that we've been working on for the last 20 years, not just in New York, but across the country and around the world.
Yeah. So Chief, I want to talk about that. And please, audience, there's a lot of you, I can see your numbers. So we just want you to start asking questions, but I have some that came in before, and I see Linda Kabulian too. So in about 10 minutes or so, 12 minutes, I'll start to do that. But I want to now, the book sort of pivots in time. I mean, after you go through the day and the details of the day, and this notion of also the fire department didn't ask. I mean, that's also important. Everyone says they didn't know, but they also didn't ask. You are basically tasked or part of the effort to rebuild what happened to the fire department. And I want to first, before I talk about resiliency, which will end the book, will end the talk on, I want to just talk about where do you start? Like, I mean, it's like, like it's the emotions, it's the physical, it's the historic, I mean, everything. What were your priorities for the New York Fire Department? And then how did you go about getting them when you can sort of begin to think about rebuilding this institution?
We had to rebuild and from the people we lost. Our special operations units were decimated. Our top of the department, many of them were killed. So all of us had to move into positions a lot quicker than we ever expected, including myself. But there was more than that. We had to connect to the intelligence community, to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, because we wanted to understand the threat environment. And before 9/11, we were not included. And after 9/11, we were now part of it. I had I finally got a top secret clearance and was getting information about the threat, and also giving my ideas of how I see the threat environment. But the other thing was to work closely with our counterparts, particularly FDNY and NYPD. And yes, we had meetings and writing procedures and and the National Incident Management System came about, and the city's incident management system. But the real change, and we shared a video from police helicopters.
Yeah.
Don't have to ask for it. And news helicopters. So
Yeah.
I was able to talk the news stations into sending us videos without commercials. But the real change took place by bringing people together. And instead of meeting at either police headquarters or fire headquarters, I started FDNY's Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness, which was an old army base that overlooked in Queens, that overlooked the Bayside Bay. So just a beautiful place where the stress levels goes down.
Yeah.
But the secret was, and I attribute this to Jules's grandmother, who told Jules, how do you get to firefighters? How do you work with them? Well, you cook for them. So what we did at the center before every meeting or after every meeting, and you got to picture this. This is FDNY sitting around a big conference table, NYPD, EMS, OEM, and a number of other agencies. We cooked a good firehouse meal.
Yeah.
And when you do that and break bread together and have this group of people from all different agencies coming together, you begin to trust each other.
Yeah.
And that's how we made changes. And we had a lot to do, and not only international terrorism, also dealing with domestic terrorism and active shooters. And we got to work together.
Yeah. So that is amazing. I mean, that I think is one of the remarkable aspects, or sort of the reminder aspects, is that, someone will look at you and your titles and go, oh, I could never be that. But we are at a school right now in which, not to say you're ordinary, you are extraordinary, but that basically with a good meal and lots of care and training, that this is something that can be taught. And I think one of the things about the book, and I wonder if you might share a story or two from the book, if you want to read or whatever, is it actually is also filled with some humor, that part of the culture of first responders, you could call it gallows humor or whatever, but that to relieve the stress, or to just, given that the way the world is, that there are stories that are also about the humor in our humanity. So I just, I don't know if there's any stories you want to relate, or I wanted the audience to know that it's actually, there are moments of lots of smiling too.
Yeah, and Juliette, you brought up about ordinary.
Yeah.
And the reason why I chose that for a title is because that day I saw my firefighters going up the stairs, and while people were coming down, telling them they could make it out of here, to keep going, don't stop. Simple words. And when my brother was coming down after I ordered the evacuation, he stopped on the 9th floor, and he directed people from one stairs to a safer stairs out. Something very ordinary. And I think our heroes, we think of heroes as being superheroes.
Yeah.
And but it was some ordinary things that day. But I could tell you, it was March of 2002, after the Nardé brothers aired their film 9/11 documentary, which showed inside the North Tower. And probably a couple weeks after the airing of the film, or maybe a week after, a bunch of high school teenagers came to the firehouse. And they're talking to the firefighters, and the firefighters are showing them the rigs. Actually, they're new rigs because the old ones were crushed. And then they said, can we see the chief? And I happened to be working that day. So, and they told me that a bunch of high school kids are there. And I said, sure. And I came down, and I shook everybody's hand and started talking with them. And then one of the young girls, a high school teenager, said, "I thought you were taller," and everybody laughed. But it was this image of superheroes bigger than life. And when they saw not only me, but the other firefighters, we looked ordinary.
Yeah.
And I think the important part that day, these teenagers saw that maybe they too can be this ordinary hero that can make a difference in people's lives. So it was a lot of little chuckles back and forth. But I think that day, all of us learned an important lesson that we're not superheroes, but we still can change the world by doing some ordinary things at critical moments.
Yeah, yeah. Then I love that story, because also it's just like the truthfulness of youth. You know, you're short. You know. So tell me a little bit. The book then you know, it begins with the day, and then about you and how you got to that position, and then the sort of rebuilding, and then talks about resiliency, the term that most people, we know what it means, but we don't know what it is, right? We know, like, yes, of course, it's a good thing. We want to be resilient. And you know, focus on ways of thinking about resiliency that might provide some guidance for our viewers about sort of, you know, what is it? How should we think about resiliency?
Resiliency is a process, and I found that process within myself, my firefighters, and actually within the larger community. But I also, part of my job, was going around to other terrorist events, and one particular one was the attacks on Paris.
Yeah.
And I sat down with this SWAT team that went in, with the firefighters, and with the Minister of the Interior, who became the Prime Minister. And they told me their stories. And what was interesting, when we went over there, and I took a couple Harvard professors on Howard and Dutch Leonard, and I took Jules Sandé because he was able to translate simultaneous for us, and a couple fire chiefs and some Homeland Security folks.
Good.
And, you know, you get a typical PowerPoint presentation, but after they realized Jules and I were in the room, they started to tell their personal story. And a 45-minute PowerPoint went to 3 hours of talking. So we share, but part of that sharing is the sense of resilience. And I think the first thing we do is we want to connect to each other. So think about those small memorials in the street of flowers and candles and pictures.
Yeah.
And people, we don't want to be alone. So we see people gathering, and we saw people gathering on West Street in New York after 9/11. And after the 2015 attacks in Paris, we saw them gathering on the streets there. So there's this sense that we want to be with each other, and certainly the firehouse gave us an opportunity of being together. Even if we didn't talk about it, we knew each other's feelings.
Yeah.
But then the second thing is we reflect on the past, and we do that by after action reports, commission reports, 9/11 commission. But more important is telling stories. Something what we're doing now. We tell stories, something what my Paris friends did. They just told personal stories. And what the book does is it's personal stories. But we can't stay there. I think what we do after that is we envision the future.
Yeah.
And what has to be changed. And we take those changes, and there's a sense of hope that we can make a difference. And by doing that, the fourth level, I think, is enhancing the present with a new purpose. And for me, I went from a very nice job of working only 24 hours a week
Yeah.
To working 24/7 for the next 17 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it gave me a sense of purpose. And let me show you just one slide.
Good.
Um, um, and there's another thing that we don't think of, and this is in the Kennedy School.
Yeah.
One of the classrooms where I'm teaching. I think Juliette, you went before me.
Yeah.
But I think by exchanging ideas and talking with people, and literally from around the world, that's part of resilience. And I could tell you, when I did my master's at the Kennedy School, which was 2007, 2008, and talking to my classmates from around the world, that was part of my resilience, my part of bouncing back, where I could reflect on the past, but then with classmates to look forward to the future. And I'm eternally grateful for those moments as a student and as an instructor in a classroom.
Well, we're grateful to have you. I want to know it is so important that that we are able to capture your experiences and also give you time to reflect, because when you are working 24/7. So we're grateful for your continuing relationship with us. I see that there's some friends of ours watching as well. So I have to say, not to applaud this group, but these are some of the best questions I have ever seen. So I'm going to start to defer now. The first comes from my friend, Linda Kabulian, who I haven't talked to in a long time. I feel I say that all the time during the pandemic, who asks, and I'm going to read them just because this is a webinar, who asked a terrific question about, she's working with physician leaders at the School of Public Health, who are obviously been on the front lines of the pandemic for some time. Their incident has lasted for months and months and months. What advice do you have for them when they can debrief, learn from, and improve their organization's reactions? In other words, how do you do that process, when the attack doesn't necessarily end, by the afternoon?
And I know Linda well. So thank you, Linda, for that question. And it's a good question. I've spoken to doctors and nurses and healthcare workers, and I think they go through the same thing we went through, and that's being overwhelmed by the situation. But the important part, and especially in ED, an emergency department, if I don't feel alone, that my co-workers, the whole health staff, like we're in this together, that helps. And sometimes we don't even have to express it in words. I know that how I'm feeling at this moment. But what took place almost immediately is that healthcare workers were thinking of the future, how to make it better. And we saw that happening by connecting to other hospitals. So I know in Queens, in New York, at the peak in 2020, where New York was overwhelmed by the amount of COVID patients, Elmhurst Hospital was in Queens was overrun. People were in the street, but hospitals adjacent weren't filled. But now we talk to those other hospitals, and we understand how many beds and how much staff, and so we look at sharing data. So immediately, those hospital workers, nurses, and doctors now started to change things. So there is that new purpose that I can make a difference. There is hope. I don't have to do what I did back in April of 2020. In 2021, we can do things differently, and we can work as a team across the city, across the state, and even across the country, sharing ventilators.
Yeah.
So I think our hospital workers are going the same to that our 9/11 workers. And let me just end this question is, and I don't have the picture ready, but it's one that I love, and that's a fire truck pulling up in front of actually Elmhurst Hospital, and the hospital workers, nurses, and doctors and staff come out, and the firefighters on top of the fire truck applauding. And I could remember driving down West Street after 9/11 and people standing on Canal Street and West just applauding. And now we reciprocated back to our healthcare workers of the firefighters applauding.
Yeah.
And those little things, believe it or not, they mean a lot.
Yeah.
Those
Absolutely.
ordinary things kind of touched our hearts.
Yeah.
And I know our healthcare workers.
Yeah. So I want to, this question from William Reese is actually really tactical, but it's actually something I've often thought, like, just tactically, how do you all think in fire and incident command about high-rise buildings now? Has there been a tremendous change in thinking about it, or did that just seem unique? But that's like such a good question, because people probably wonder.
And that's a very good question. I touch a little bit on it because the topic is sensitive. But think about it. In 1993, the World Trade Center was attacked, a high-rise building. 9/11, it was attacked. We saw in Mumbai that the hotel, the Taj, was attacked. And I think that as we think about our skyscrapers, we need to think that they are still a target for terrorism. And I could tell you that I have told the intelligence community that and wrote a 30-page document at the, not classified, but at the FOUO level for official use only. I have testified in front of Congress on this very subject. I've also briefed leaders at the UN, and that both NYPD and FDNY have trained together. And before I retired, on the 63rd floor of the new One World Trade Center, we held an international conference on vertical terrorism. So it is something first responders and the intelligence community are very aware of, and the building owners. I've also met with the building owners for them to do things in the construction of the building, and also to safeguard different components of the building. So really good question, and something we're very conscious of.
So I wanted to ask about what William Seeley, so here it is. I'm sorry, I had lost it for a second. When you talked about rebuilding and then resiliency, and about how you try to think about moving forward, as you get further away, I'm paraphrasing, adding a little bit to Seeley's question. As you get further away, it gets harder. People have moved on. They're tired. They're forgetting the lessons. So what was your biggest challenge while trying to implement changes after 9/11?
The biggest challenge is for us to understand that we're still vulnerable, and to do what the 9/11 Commission pointed to as failures, a failure of imagination, a failure of information sharing, and a failure of unified command. And I think we have to remind each other that we can't do that again. that we have to stand next to each other. We have to think of the unthinkable. And we have to share information. But people do forget, or they weren't even born, or they were too young. But there's something that I saw, and I do some teaching up at West Point, and we show the 9/11 documentary, and I can tell you that those cadets who look at it for the first time have the same emotional reaction as when we first saw it in 2002. And I think by touching people's hearts, we can get them not only to remember, but to look forward. And what do we need to do now? And what is your place in this global society? Because not only do we have to worry about terrorism, we have to worry about climate change and pandemics and so many other things.
Yeah. So that's right. And I think I'm sure you've had this experience. And now my kids who were born in the 2001 to 2005, we had them watch the Netflix series. I forget the exact name, a 5 or 6 part series, which was just, and the opening hour is just the day of. And I think our kids have not I don't think what it actually was in real time begins to get lost. And I think this leads to an anonymous question, but just a very lovely one. It's from someone who was a second grader when 9/11 happened. She's seen it through the lens of essentially looking backwards, although remembers the day. And I wanted to ask, how do you want 9/11 to be remembered? And what do you and your family do each year on that day to help deal with the grief from the attack, your brother's death, and remember the victims? I just think that's how do you want her, our anonymous second grader attendee, also to remember?
I like them to remember those ordinary heroes, but I want to look at it that, and the Nat Geo documentary, which is very, very powerful, and they use footage from not only the Nade film, but so many other news clips and some I haven't seen before. But to remember this sense of unity, but also this sense of connecting. So on the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of 9/11, like I do every year, I go down to the World Trade Center site of the 2 reflecting pools, and I'm there for the morning as they read names, and as the bells gong at those 6 critical points of 4 planes used as terrorist missiles and the collapse of both World Trade Center. But this year was so different. There's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people normally. There had to be at least 15,000 people there. But what really touched me the most, and I see if I could get through this without getting too emotional, is that those people that were 2 years old that day, 20 years ago, but lost their father or mother. They particularly, I put on my uniform for that one day, and because in the Nat Geo film, they knew me, and they came up to me. This one woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and told me she saw the film, and that she just wanted to connect to me because I was the vehicle to connect to her firefighter father. And it was very emotional. But at the same time, I looked deeper into her eyes that was with tears running down her face. but it was the sense that this generation that will come and lead us forward to think differently, to feel that sense of unity, to be willing to face the challenges and to do it together. That's what I saw in her eyes. So those people that don't remember the exact day are now coming to us with a whole sense of a new type of mission to make a difference.
That's a beautiful story. And I think first of all, that was Ayan Aiden, was the second grader at the time. And I want to thank you for such an important question, and Chief, for your honest answer. I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions, but I do think that that's a good segue to our friend Rich Serino's question, and he's out there, which gets to this new generation you're talking about as you have left the FDNY, and you are teaching and writing and training for new leaders in public safety and emergency management, and the new world we find ourselves in, where it's not just terrorism but cyber and pandemics and natural disasters. What 3 bits of advice, even life advice, would you give them to have them enter the world or stay in the world?
I think when we talk about leadership, there's, let me go academic on you. There's 5 C's I like to talk about, and the first 3 are really important. And the first is connect. I want to connect to people with voice, video, and data. And I just don't want to connect to my organization. I want to connect to other organizations, and I want to do it in real time. And then the second thing is to collaborate. And not only do we stand within arm's distance of each other, but we use what I like to refer to as crisis empathy. Seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. And certainly I've done that at scenes, for example, of an active shooter, where I have gone up to my counterparts and say, I know you're sending your officers in, and I have my paramedics standing by in case something goes wrong. And then under force protection, we're going to go in and we're going to save that officer. So that sense of crisis empathy, but also with that collaboration is flattening command. And I think that's where we talk about inclusion and diversity.
Yeah.
That I need law enforcement, I need fire, I need medical, I need the mayor's office, I need FEMA, I need the Red Cross, and then I need the state, I need Homeland Security, and that they feel inclusive, that they're part of the team. And only by doing that can the third C, which is to coordinate, it can actually happen. And the last 2 C's is command and control. And that's, instead of looking at this hierarchical, to look at it as a network.
Yeah.
And we don't teach people how to have a unified command in a network world. We like this hierarchical, command tree. Well, that's not what it's like. That might be part of it. Yes, we need the National Incident Management System, but we also need the ability to work in a network world, and to do that is to be able to connect, collaborate, and coordinate.
Yep, that's exactly right. Okay, we're coming to our end. So this is another anonymous. Sometimes that's just people forget to fill in, but about yourself, Chief, and about the healing process. 20 years was, everyone felt something who had been around, but what has been the most surprising thing you learned about the healing process for yourself as time has passed, and we have now we are now put the 20th anniversary behind us?
For me personally, healing is having a supportive family.
Yeah.
I think I drove my wife crazy by working so much, but Ginny was very, very supportive, and after each anniversary, after I do my thing in the city, we come back and we take a nice long walk on the beach together. So I think that's important. Having close friends that you can depend upon and trust is also important. But for me, I was given a privilege, I think, and that's because I got promoted very quickly.
Yeah.
That I was able to make change.
Yeah.
So any victim of violence, besides the physical act, it's the loss of control. And that might be the most devastating thing. And we know for firefighters who retired, they felt alone and the loss of control, and they had to deal with post-traumatic stress. But for me, because I was part of the change element and I could push things, that the stress, the post-traumatic stress reduced. Of course, I had stress because people thought I was crazy trying to push my ideas forward. But that was a different way. But I think as we build, the other important element is to build partnerships. You can't go through this alone, either from that day or moving forward. So I built some incredible friendships and partnerships. And I think that's what helped me along the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful, and we look forward to 20 years more in whatever and however long we can keep you. I want to thank the Ash Center for their putting this together and for inviting me. I want to thank all of those who submitted questions, and got through about 75% of them. And then I want to thank the Chief, not just for today, but for the book and your continuing service wherever you are in having us learn the lessons, and also look forward to a world that will certainly provide us with plenty of crises to come. So thank you so much for your time as well.
Do we have time for just one quick slide?
Yes.
Okay, last slide. And I want people to see this. And then the saying at the top, which is for me, is that the courage to be an ordinary hero is in each one of us. And I took this slide at the very top of the new One World Trade Center. And if anything, I just want to leave this with our audience and our Harvard community, that we need to think differently, and we can make a difference just by being our own ordinary hero as we look out into the world in front of us.
Thank you so much, Chief, and thank you to everyone who came, and the Ash Center.
Thanks, everybody.